You think the war ended in 1945, right? People danced in the streets, sailors kissed strangers, and the world suddenly became safe again. That's the version they took. Let me tell you what it really looked like. Not in New York, not in London, but in the places where the war refused to die. My name is Daniel Morrison, and in May 1945, I was 24 years old, standing in the ruins of Europe with a pistol, a fake passport, and orders that said, "Collect what the dying armies leave behind." They called it post-hostility intelligence gathering. We called it cleaning up ghosts. The war was technically over, but no one had told the men with rifles in the shadows. Berlin was a corpse still twitching, and Vienna was a theater without actors, just civilians wandering through rubble, pretending they still had lives. The air smelled like smoke, mold, and surrender. You wouldn't have lasted an hour. See, the problem with the end of a war is that nobody agrees on what end means. The soldiers are tired, civilians are broken, and the spies, well, we're the ones stuck between the paperwork and the corpses, trying to make sense of who's lying this. My office was a single room above a half-bombed bakery in Salzburg. The sign still said Bäckerei Hoffmann, but Frau Hoffmann had fled weeks earlier, leaving me with her flour dust and a mattress stuffed with straw that crunched like snow when I rolled over. I'd been assigned there as part of a small Allied unit with a mission so vague it might as well have been divine. Find German scientists before the Russians do. Sounds exciting, right? It wasn't. It was cold, bureaucratic chaos dressed up as adventure. Every morning started the same. I'd scrape frost off the inside of the window with a butter knife and listen to the town trying to pretend it wasn't starving. You could hear hunger in those streets. Not the dramatic kind, just the quiet clatter of empty pots and the silence that follows when nobody has the strength to argue. We operated under fake diplomatic papers, U.S. Office of Cultural Affairs, as if culture had survived the bombing. My alias was David Monroe, an attaché collecting art records. I had no art, no records, and no attachment. What I had was a code phrase, a network of half-loyal informants, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones until even victory feels suspicious. You'd wake up thinking you'd survived something. Then you'd remember survival wasn't the same as safety. My first day on that assignment, I was supposed to meet a local contact, an Austrian engineer, who had worked on radio equipment for the Wehrmacht. He claimed to have blueprints the Soviets would pay fortunes for. I was told to get them first. He picked the meeting spot, a church still missing its roof. Rain fell directly onto the pews, baptizing anyone desperate enough to sit. I got there early because, in my line of work, early means alive. I took the long way, 3 loops around the square, 2 false stops at a market stand, 1 glance in every reflection I could find. Nothing obvious. But nothing obvious in 1945. Austria didn't mean much. Everyone was watching everyone. Everyone was selling something, even if it was just trust. The engineer arrived 10 minutes late, sweating through his coat despite the cold. His shoes didn't match. A bad sign. People missing homes often lost shoes, but people missing stories always had mismatched ones. He sat beside me on the splintered pew and started talking too fast in a mix of German and English that tasted like fear. He had the blueprints, yes, diagrams of experimental transmitters, something about coded frequency hopping, way ahead of its time. But he also had a problem. The Russians had been to his apartment the night before. He didn't say how he got away. He didn't have to. The tremor in his hand did the talking. I told him to hand me the papers quietly, naturally, as if we were discussing choir schedule. He hesitated. I knew that look, the moment when greed, terror, and hope all share the same face. That's when it happened. That's when 50th or the Soviet matching his. He blinked, trying to calculate if I was threatening him or saving him. Truth is, I wasn't sure either. When he finally passed the rolled documents under the bench, the sound they made, just that soft rasp of paper on wood, was louder to me than the bombings ever were, because bombs are simple. Betrayal whispered. I left the church, walked 5 blocks, and never looked back. I didn't. I could already feel the city rearranging itself behind me, conversations pausing, curtains shifting, footsteps that learned your rhythm just a little too well. You'd think paranoia is learned. It isn't. It's instinct, evolution, with a trench coat. By the time I reached my safe flat, the rain had turned the streets into mirrors. I checked the door, untouched. I checked the radio, dead, as expected. I checked the papers, wrong. The top sheet was real. German schematics, perfectly logical, labeled in neat handwriting. The second sheet was a message, handwritten in blue pencil. Too late, he's ours. I didn't need a signature. I already knew who ours meant. Not Americans, not Russians, something older. One of the shadow networks that survived regimes the way rats survive floods. Call them Nazis, call them patriots, call them what you like. In 1945, Europe was full of people who decided that losing the war didn't mean losing their cause. I burned the papers in a coffee tin and watched the ink curl into smoke. The room filled with that smell, like scorched sugar and secrets. You never forget that smell. It stays in your clothes, in your hair, in your conscience. That night I wrote a report by candlelight. The wax dripped onto my notebook like blood clot. Contact compromised. Material suspect. Recommend extraction of Asset Hoffman. Then I tore the page out and burned that too, because the truth doesn't travel safely by paper. Here's what you don't understand about being a spy at the end of a war. It's not about information, about timing. You're standing in a world that's just been reset like a broken clock, and everyone's pretending they know what hour it is, but they don't. Every government is guessing. Every agent is improvising. Every breath could belong to a different regime by morning. You wouldn't last a day, not because you'd get caught, but because you'd forget which side you were on before breakfast. I went to bed with my boots still on and the pistol under my pillow. I dreamed of silence, the kind that doesn't mean peace but waiting. When I woke, it was dawn, and the war still hadn't ended. It never really did. People think the hardest part of spying in wartime, that's wrong. The hardest part is staying real, remembering you exist somewhere beyond the alias, the forged signatures, the faces you pretend to trust. In May 1945, Salzburg was beautiful, the way a cemetery is beautiful when you forget what's buried under it. Streets lined with buildings that still had facades, but no souls. Every door had been kicked in at least once, every family had at least one member missing, and every silence had an audience. I'd been in that city for 5 days under the name David Monroe, Cultural Attaché, United States Office of Post-War Reconstruction. My job description: facilitate exchange of cultural materials. My actual job: find what's left of the German intelligence apparatus before the Soviets do, and before the Germans rebuilt it under another flag. You'd have hated the smell. Everything smelled of coal dust and wet plastic, even bread. The air carried that sour mix of smoke and disinfectant that only exists in places that were recently scrubbed of blood. Each morning I made the same walk down Getreidegasse, the old merchant street, pretending to browse the broken shop. I always paused at a toy shop, a single cracked doll in display. She had one eye missing and the other painted too. I used her reflection to watch my own. That morning I had a meeting at the so-called Allied Liaison, a polite name of ex-soldier and linguist stuffed into an abandoned bank. The building still had bullet holes in its columns, and the safe in the basement had been converted into a records room. My superior, Major Harold Blanchard, was already there, staring at a pile of photographs like he was trying to will them into cooperation. He looked 50, but war years count double. He didn't look up when I entered. "Monroe, you were supposed to meet that engineer again." "Can't." He's either defected or dissected. He finally looked at me. "You burned the documents? Wouldn't you?" He gave that little smirk bureaucrats use when they want to sound dangerous. "You realize we have analysts in London who decide what gets burned. Tell them to come smell this place. Then we'll discuss protocol." He didn't laugh. Nobody laughed in 1945 unless they were drunk or insane. Blanchard slid one photograph across the table. A man in a Wehrmacht uniform, eyes closed, lying in a ditch. "You know who this is?" I looked. The face was swollen, half submerged in mud. But even dead, I recognized Colonel Reinhard Weiss, the officer who had overseen signal interception in Vienna. I'd been told he escaped 2 weeks ago. He's not supposed to be dead. Neither are half the men in this folder, but someone's been killing them before we can reach them. The Soviets claim innocence. So does everyone else. Any leads? He tapped his cigarette on the desk, leaving a ring of gray ash like a halo. "We have a name, or a code name. Owl." I waited. He didn't elaborate. "Owl. That's it? That's it. You're going to Prague." I almost laughed. Prague's Russian territory. Temporarily, he said. We have people there. You'll find them. People or ghosts. He smiled thinly. Does it matter? He handed me a small envelope. Inside were forged transit papers stamped with a Czech seal, 2,000 shilling, and a folded railway timetable. There was no ticket. In this business, tickets were too traceable. I spent that afternoon preparing for the trip the way you prepare for surgery, hoping the pain will make sense later. Packed only what wouldn't identify me: a razor, a notebook with blank pages, and a silver lighter engraved with initials that weren't mine. Before leaving the city, I stopped at the ruins of the cathedral. The roof had collapsed, but the altar still stood, charred. I lit a candle out of habit, not faith. The flame trembled like it was afraid of being seen. That's when I heard footsteps. 2 sets, soft, deliberate. I didn't turn immediately. You never turn first. A woman's voice said, "You don't believe in God, do you?" "Depends on who's listening," I replied. She stepped beside me. Mid-30s, coat too clean for a local, hair tucked under a gray beret. She didn't look at me, only at the candle. "Major Blanchard sent me. Name's Claire Dalton. I'm your escort to the border." I studied her hands. No ring, fingernails cut short. No tremor. "You British?" "Canadian," he said, like it was an apology. We walked out together into the drizzle. The train to Prague wasn't a train so much as a collection of surviving rail cars stitched together by desperate. Third class. No heat. The windows didn't close properly. Every seat smelled of damp wool and regret. Claire took the window seat. I took the one facing the door. She watched the countryside blur into darkness while I watched the passenger. A farmer clutching a sack that probably contained his last food. A mother nursing a baby with eyes too tired for crying. 2 soldiers in unmarked uniform sharing a flask of something that smelled like paint thinner. "You ever been to Prague?" she asked. "Only in the wrong." She smiled. "You make everything sound. It's the only language people still understand." Around midnight, the train stopped in the middle of nowhere. No station, no light, just open fields and fog. The conductor's lantern moved past the window like a ghost. Then I saw him, a man in a leather coat standing by the tracks, not boarding, not leaving, just watching, his face hidden by the brim of his. He held something metallic at his side, maybe a cigarette case. Claire followed my gaze. "Friend of yours?" "Not yet," I said. The train jerked and started moving again, slower this. The man didn't move, just vanished into fog, like he'd never been real. Claire leaned closer, voice low. "We were told someone might try to intercept us before Prague." "By whom?" "By everyone," she said, "which means no one knows anything." I leaned back, pretending calm, though my stomach felt like barbed wire. The rhythm of the train became the rhythm of steady, relentless. After 20 minutes of silence, said quietly, "You think we'll make it?" I said the only honest thing a spy. "We'll make somewhere." Outside, the moon slipped behind cloud and the countryside turned into a moving graveyard of burned villages and silent chimneys. The war was over on paper, but the land hadn't received the memo. I thought of the man in the leather coat, standing motionless in the fog. There's always someone watching, even when there's no one left to care. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of a city where every building whispered, every statue had eyes, and every grave still had an address. Prague, the place where peace went to hide. We crossed the border into what used to be Czechoslovakia just before dawn. No guards, no flags, no fanfare, just a wooden sign half burned by the retreating Germans and a rusted watchtower leaning like a drum. The train screeched to a halt in a place that wasn't on the time. A single platform, fog so thick it looked painted on. The sign read, "Lidovis." I'd never heard of it. Neither had Claire. "Scheduled stop?" I asked. She shook her head. "Trains don't stop here. Not since the bombing," which made sense. Half the station was gone. Roof collapsed, windows shattered. But the platform light was on, humming faintly like someone was still paying the electric bill for the dead. The conductor came through the car, eyes darting, muttering, and he didn't look at anyone directly, just repeated the same word, "Controlla," inspection. Claire's hand slid into her coat pocket. I knew that motion. One hand, 2 men boarded at the front, civilian clothes, military. That contradict. They carried expressions unnecessary. One started down the other, reaction. Classic 2-step interrogation. When they reached us, the taller one spoke for papers. Claire handed hers with the faint boredom of someone who's been inspected 100 times. I passed my, smiling just enough to seem harmless. He studied them longer than comfort allows. Cultural affairs, he read aloud. Exchange program? That's right, I said. We're cataloging post-war art for repatriation. He stared at me as if I'd just confessed to witchcraft. Many thieves use art as cover. Many policemen use suspicion as oxygen, I replied. The shorter one smirked, the taller didn't. He folded the papers, nodded, and moved on. When they were gone, Claire exhaled slowly. They weren't Czech, I know. Gestapo leftovers? Or Soviet forerunners, I said. In 1945, they're the same species. Men who enjoy obedience. The train shuddered and to move again. The fog swallowed the platform, but just before it disappeared, I saw a flicker, a lantern swinging behind the ruins of the ticket hall. Too rhythmic for the wind. 3 short flashes, too long. Morse, the letter G. Claire noticed my focus. What? Someone down there knows we're here. Friendly? In my experience, friends don't use Morse at train stations that don't exist. We reached Prague by evening. If Salzburg had been a graveyard, Prague was the mausoleum. Majestic, silent, pretending dignity, while the worms did their work underneath. The train rolled into Masaryk station, though it felt more like a ghost terminal than a hub. Bomb damage patched with tarpaulin, soldiers milling with no orders, civilians trading cigarettes for bread. Claire and I disembarked separately, blending into the chaos. We'd been given an address for a safe house, number 12, Vinohradskas, but the note that carried it had been handed down through too many intermediaries to trust. I followed her 5 minutes later, taking side streets, crossing behind tram. Every alley had eyes, every shadow felt rehearsed. Halfway there I caught it again, the echo of that rhythm from the ghost station, a faint reflection from a window across the street, a pattern of light pulses, 3 short, 2 long. G, whoever G was, he'd followed the train. At the safe house, a man in wire-rimmed glasses opened the door before we knocked. Late 40s, teachers. You're late, English flavored with Prague. We stopped at a station that doesn't exist. And then you came the right way. Inside, the building smelled of mildew and boiled potatoes, the national aroma of defeat. A single lamp burned over a wooden table scattered with maps. He introduced himself as Jan Horak, liaison for Allied Operations East, which sounded official and probably wasn't. He gestured to the table. Your major sent this ahead. On the map, circles marked certain city blocks, warehouse, post office, radio towers. Next to them, small inked letters, W-O-L. Owl, Horak, not. We believe it's an old Abwehr signal unit repurposed. Someone is killing officers before they can testify. We intercepted a code sequence tied to that signature. It came from the industrial quarter. Claire leaned. We need confirmation the network's still active. Horak looked between us. Then you'll need to go tonight. I stared out the window. The city was wrapped in fog again, street lamp glowing like trapped souls. You have transport? He chuckled. Here. Transport means legs. We left the house near midnight. No moon. Cobblestones, slick with drizzle. The streets carried the hush of curfew. Our path led past the old Jewish quarter, where names still hung on doors like unanswered prayers. Some windows glowed faintly, whispering around candles, afraid even of light. Claire walked a few paces, her silhouette crisp under the lamplight. She moved like someone trained by rules and kept alive by breaking them. You ever think about quitting? I asked. She didn't slow. Quitting what? The pretending, the names, the cause that keeps changing its name. She smiled without turning. You sound tired. I am. Then you're finally good at it. We reached the industrial rows of warehouses, half of them hollow shells. The river ran black beside us, carrying debris, and Horak's coordinates led to an abandoned postal depot. A single truck outside, tires deflated, license plate missed. The door padlocked, but not recently. Inside, the air tasted metallic, like blood dried too long. We moved by torchlight, 1 beam each, low to the floor. Daniel, Claire whispered. I turned. On the wall, scrawled in chalk, 3 short lines and 2 long, G. Then a word beneath it, Sova, Czech for owl. A trap announces itself that politely. I barely said move before the floorboards groaned above us. Boots, quick, practice. We dove behind a conveyor belt as a burst of submachine gun fire shredded the doorway. Wood splinters sang past my ear. Claire rolled to cover, returning 2 shots up the staircase. One hit something. The other hit silence. Then a voice, male, accented, almost friendly. "You should have stayed in Salzburg, Mr. Morrison." I froze. No one here was supposed to know. Claire's eyes widened. "How?" "Because we all work for the same dead empire. Some of us just haven't accepted the funeral." A grenade clinked on the concrete near my boot. Reflex, I kicked it toward the open doorway and threw myself. The blast chewed the air into dust and thunder. When the smoke cleared, the staircase gone. So was the voice. We coughed our way outside into the rain. Claire looked at me, face streaked with soot. "He knew you?" "He knew me, or he knew who I was before the paperwork changed. Which means the OWL isn't an organization. It's a ledger. A list of people who remember things they shouldn't." She stared down the empty street. "Then what was the ghost station? A warning, or an invitation?" The rain fell harder, washing soot into rivers along the curb. Somewhere a bell tolled, distant, irregular, like a heartbeat losing count. I looked back at the ruined depot and thought of the man's voice, calm, educated, certain. Spies die quick when they panic, but they rot slow when they start to remember. That night, Prague felt less like a city and more like a test. How long can you pretend you're one of the living before the dead notice? We didn't go back to Horrocks' safe house. You don't walk twice into a place that might already be memorized by men who don't need doors to enter. Instead, Claire and I took shelter in an abandoned printing shop near the river. The sign above the entrance still read Tiskarna Novak, the kind of place that used to produce ration cards, posters, maybe propaganda. Now it just printed silence. I pushed the door shut, wedging a chair under the handle. Claire moved to the back, checking windows one by one. The room smelled of ink, mold, and fear, the three official perfumes of espionage. I lit the lantern low. Its light caught the particles in the air like drifting ghosts. The floor was scattered with brittle paper, slogans in Czech and German. One still read, "Victory is work." She sat on a desk, rubbing her palms together for warmth. "Whoever he was, he knew your real name, which means he's either been in one of our files," I said, "or I've been in one of his." Claire's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "You think he's Owl?" I shook my head. "No, Owl doesn't talk. Owl writes history before it happened." That got her attention. "Met him?" "Once, or maybe I met one of his mirrors." I pulled the Minox camera pocket, a spy's rosary, and placed it. Back in 43, we intercepted coded messages through Vatican channels, messages too precise for random noise. Each ended with a single symbol, an owl drawn in blue ink. We thought it was a German code. It wasn't. An index of survivors. People who knew things governments wanted erased. She leaned back. And now they're hunting each other. History always cleans up after itself. Around 3 a.m., I heard something move outside, a soft scrape, like metal against stone. I killed the lantern, instant. Claire froze mid-breath. We waited. Silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Then came a sound, not footsteps, a flutter. Paper sliding under the door. I crawled forward and picked it up. A folded note sealed with wax, pressed into a crude owl. Inside, a single line written in perfect English. "If you want to stop dying for the past, meet me at the astronomical clock at noon." Claire whispered. "No signature?" "Doesn't need one." I held the paper up to the lantern flame and watched it curl to ash. We've been invited. Morning in Prague has the personality of a hangover. Too bright, too honest. We left separately, blending into the flow of civilians scrounging for cards and black market. The astronomical clock loomed above Old Town Square, still ticking, still lying, about time. Beneath it, tourists would one day gather and applaud its precision. In 1945, only pigeons I arrived first, dressed as a postal, gray coat, cap, bag slung across the shoulder. Claire appeared 10 minutes later as a nurse carrying bandages in a tin box. From a distance, we were just two more people pretending not to starve. At exactly noon, the clock's figures moved. The skeleton pulled its rope, the bell rang, and death nodded to the appointment. When it stopped, I noticed a man sitting at a nearby cafe table, untouched coffee steaming before him. He wore a black coat and gloves, despite the mild air. Hat tilted low. The same rhythm in his posture I'd heard in that voice back in the warehouse. He didn't look up, didn't signal. Just placed something under the saucer, a small envelope, and stood to leave. I waited until he was half a block away before moving. Inside the envelope, a photograph and a key. The photograph showed a group of soldiers at a formal dinner. German officer, 3 men, 1 woman, but someone had drawn red X's across 2 faces. The woman's face was untouched. Her name scrawled beneath, Elsa Kruger. The key was brass, tagged with a number, 17. Claire studied it. Hotel room? Locker? Or a grave? On the back of the photo, a message in the same handwriting. She remembers who built the ghosts. Claire frowned. Who the hell is Elsa Kruger? Not who. She's the kind of person the war invented. Scientists, linguists, engineers. People too smart to die quietly. Then we find her. We started at the archives. In 1945, archives meant a basement with damp boxes and 2 clerks who hadn't been paid in months. After a few cigarettes and 1 chocolate bar, we learned that Elsa Kruger had worked at the Karlovy Institute of Radio Communications, closed since the occupation. Last recorded address, Hotel Merkur, room 17. The key fit the pattern perfectly. When we reached the hotel, the clerk didn't even look up. The lobby smelled like old rain and the new lie. Most of the building was occupied by officers who no longer had uniforms to justify their arrogance. Claire handled the desk. Room 17, she said casually, sliding a forged requisition form across the counter. The clerk glanced at it, shrugged, handed over the ledger. She left 2 days ago, he said, but maybe not far. The corridor to room 17 felt longer than physics allowed. Wallpaper peeling, carpet damp. I turned the key slowly. The lock resisted, then clicked. The room was small, almost surgical. Bed made, curtains drawn, mirror cracked. On the table sat a single item, a portable radio transmitter, dismantled, wires coiled like veins. Claire ran a gloved finger over the surface. She left in a hurry. I crouched by the transmitter. Underneath, scratched into the wood, another owl coordinate, South Prague, by the river, and then the smallest, a creak in the hall. Not wait, intention. I motioned to Claire. We froze. The shadow under the door shifted. Someone was standing there. No knock, no words, just silence, waiting to be broken. I moved first, kicked the door open with full force. The hall was empty, except for a folded newspaper on the floor. Inside it, another photograph. Claire gasped. That's me, Daniel Morrison, circa 1943, in uniform, shaking hands with a man I'd only ever seen once, Colonel Reinhard Weiss. The same Weiss found dead in a ditch. On the back, 2 words. Next, we left through the back alley, cutting toward the river. Why would they warn you before killing you? Claire asked. They're not warning me. They're inviting me. The owl wants witnesses, not corpses. We stopped at the embankment, where the coordinates. A warehouse again, but different. New locks, clean walls. Someone had been preparing it for a long time. Through a broken window, I saw them. 3 figures around a table, light flickering from a lantern. Was the man from the cafe. The second, I couldn't see his face. The third was a woman, blonde, thin, calm. Claire whispered, Elsa Kruger. The woman looked up as if she'd heard her name across distance. Her eyes found mine through the glass. She smiled. Not warmth, not recognition, just inevitability. Then she raised a camera and took a photo. The flash tore through the night, like lightning announcing judgment. And that's when I realized this wasn't a meeting. It was documentation. We hadn't found the owl. The owl had decided we were part of its archive. There's a particular silence after a flashbulb pops. It isn't quiet. It's stunned. The world blinks, pretends it didn't just see you, then files you somewhere you can't reach. Through the warehouse window, the 3 figures froze in that. The man from the cafe lowered his gloved hand from the shutter release of a small plate camera. The second man angled his face away. Trained habit, expensive. The woman, Elsa Kruger, didn't flinch. She set the camera on the table like a scalpel and watched the smoke coil off the bulb. That's not a meeting, Claire whispered. That's a ledger. Archivist said, of the dead or of the soon-to-be. The alley stank of river rot and coal. We kept low beneath the broken sill. Inside, documents lay arranged on oilcloth, photographs in envelopes, rolls of microfilm, index cards with neat blue handwriting, 3 fountain pens aligned like instruments. Not a gang, a bureau, the kind that survives regimes by option. Knock politely and get shot, or enter impolitely and learn something. For we do. She touched the back door handle, testing. New lock, new hinges. Someone loved this. I palmed my lighter, silver, not mine, and took a breath I couldn't afford. Create a wrong noise. Then we make the right one. She understood. Claire stepped into the alley mouth, let her heels ring deliberately on the stones, then retreated. Inside, chairs scraped, a pistol clicked, breath paused. In that narrowed attention, I slid the cracked window higher and pulled myself through into the rafters, belly down on a beam that wasn't as sturdy as Faith. Claire ghosted in behind me, quieter. From above, the scene sharpened. The cafe man, tall academic cruelty in the cheekbones, stood by the door with a Mauser in low ready. The second man, broad, with the unbothered calm of men who give orders, lit a cigarette off the lantern chimney and exhaled like judgment. Elsa adjusted focus on the camera again, satisfied the plate was cooling properly. "Mr. Morrison," said the broad-shouldered one, "English as a ruler. You're late. Names are currency. He'd just tried to overpay me. Train schedules in Prague are opinions, lowering from the boots, meeting concrete without drama." Claire dropped beside me, pistol at her thigh, eyes done pretending to be kind. The Mauser tracked us. Elsa did not. She looked at the print developing in a tray. Good shadow detail, even in poor light. Then, almost as an afterthought, "We expected just you." "I bring my own audit." The broad man's "Audits are for accountants. We are historians." "No," I said. "You're undertakers who learn to spell." Elsa's mouth twitched the idea of a smile. "Both professions serve the truth of ending." The cafe man spoke for the first time. Voice exactly the one from the postal depot, the one that knew my name too well. "We are Sova, owl." He savored the word like it had feathers. "We preserve sequences others would burn." Claire's gaze flicked to the index cards. "You preserve with bullets." "Bullets are a form of punctuation," almost kindly. I nodded at the table. "You documented Weiss, then crossed him out with a ditch." The broad man stubbed his "with ritual care. We documented Weiss for years. He chose the ditch when he chose to sell the same sequence. We are not moralists, Mr. Morrison. We are archivists. But an archive without order is a lie." Elsa spoke without looking up, hands steady in the chemical. "History remembers heroes and monsters. What it needs are witnesses, reliable ones." "And I'm reliable?" I asked. She finally met my eyes. They were the rarest color in wartime, unafraid. "You keep notes even when you burn them. You count steps even when no one's behind you. You hate the theater of espionage, which makes you good at the work. It also makes you dangerous to myth-makers, including us." Flattered, confused, the cafe man gestured to the chairs. "Sit. You're being cataloged whether you agree or not. Comfort improves accuracy." We didn't sit. They didn't insist. Professionals recognize sacred superstitions, mine included. The broad man opened a folder and slid out a photograph. The subject punched my gut. A younger me in a crowded mess hall, laughing mid-sentence, one hand dismissively in the air, the other around a tin mug. I'd never seen the picture taken. Who took it? Who kept it? He let the questions starve between us. "Why the ghost station?" Claire asked, cutting through the ritual. "Why the Morse?" "To see who could still read," the cafe man said. "Most can't. The ones who can, we keep or remove." "Keep where?" I asked. He nodded toward Elsa. "Ask the archivist." She lifted the tray. The image fixed. She held it up. It was us through the window, just before we slid down. Claire, knife-sharp in profile. Me, softened by the dirty pain. Two intruders, already footnoted. Owl is a method, a distributed index, no single body to cut, no single room to raid. When a file is complete, we seed it into rivals, Soviet, British, American, ash bin of what remains of the Reich. We leak versions of the truth that cannot all be destroyed. Redundancy is salvation. Claire's jaw hardened. "And the killings?" "Errata," Elsa said simply. "Corrections to unreliable narrators who would spoil the sequence. By dying, by being edited." The broad man watched her with cool approval, as if grading a student who found the right anchor. "Your Major Blanchard will ask you to choose what to save, the same. Only we are honest about the cost. Blanchard wants scientists before the Soviets. You want stories before they're buried." "Not stories," Elsa said too quickly. "Proofs. And me. What am I to Owl? A proof? A pawn?" The cafe man tilted his head. "A courier," he said, "and a test of whether the West deserves its own memory." He pushed a key across the table. Brass, older than the one to Elsa's, teeth worn thin by generations. A small tag. Esh 3. The Strahov Monastery, Vault 23. We have placed a reel there, microfilm, lists, correspondences, chains, names of those who built the listening posts and the prison, names of those your services will want to hire under new titles. If you deliver it intact to someone who will not barter it away, we will consider you a witness. If you do not, we will consider you an editor. And editors get punctuated. Sometimes with bullets, the broad man said. Sometimes with photographs no one will ever be allowed to read. Claire's voice was quiet steel. And if we refuse both? Elsa dried the print, pinned it to a wire. Our faces swayed slightly in the draft. Then someone else becomes the courier. Your part in the record ends with an empty space where a sentence should be. I looked at the key, looked back. Old metal can be judgmental. You expect me to walk into a monastery in a city claimed by 3 armies, I said, request the librarian to open a vault, and stroll out with a reel labeled, "Please arrest me." We expect you to remember how to be invisible, the cafe man said. You were adequate at it last. You tracked us from a station that's not on maps. That is not the same thing, he said, and the correctness of it made something sour rise. Why me? I asked. Why not use your own runners? The broad man folded his hand. Because history trusts strangers more than family, and because our last runner is in a ditch Weiss vacated. Elsa looked past me toward the window's darkness. Also because you are tired enough. There it was, the cruelty of accuracy. She wasn't wrong. Fatigue is a cheat code for truth. Fine, terms. The cafe man arched an eyebrow. You propose to negotiate with a species that files negotiations under folklore? Terms. Claire comes with me. Horak gets burned. Figuratively, not literally, if he's dirty. And no more photographs of me without my permission. Elsa actually 2 out of 3. Which 2? You'll find out in the archive, the broad man said, rising. Talking time was over. Ritual resumed. You have until Vespers. After that, the vault grows a new lock and a new key with a new courier. The Mauser lowered slightly. An exit sign without arrows. Claire and I backed toward the window. One more question. The letter G. You flashed it at us like a benediction. What does it mark? The tiniest indulgence. Gratis, he let the Latin breathe. A step, a degree, a rank in a ladder. You have climbed to G. Some never get past catalog. And what's the top? Top? He seemed genuinely puzzled. There is no. There is only the rung you live long enough to occupy. We slipped out into the alley. Rain had started again, thin and needling. The river took it without. Claire let out a breath she must have been holding. We can't trust them. We can't, but we can use them. And if the film is bait, then we find out who bites. We moved uphill toward Strahov, toward Prayer and Keys and the kind of silence that makes paper holy. Half a block from the warehouse, a figure detached from a doorway and matched our pace on the opposite side of the street. Hat low, coat ordinary, rhythm practice. Friend? Out looking. Gratis, someone keeping score. The monastery bells began to test the air. Thin, metallic, counting hours the city didn't. I palmed the brass key in my. It felt heavier than a pistol, lighter than a promise. Archivists, I thought. Undertakers who learned to spell. And me, somewhere between corpse and footnote, trying to choose which shelf to haunt. We turned up the last rise. The city exhaled fog. Behind us, a shutter clicked once. Far away, precise, already part of a file I hadn't read. Strahov Monastery sits on the western ridge of Prague, a city of saints, guarding a city of sinners. By 1945, the monks were gone, or pretending to be gone. The war had emptied faith from the halls, leaving only echoes and a faint smell of old wax. We climbed the cobbled road in fog thick enough to be Claire kept a step behind, hand inside her coat, safety off. I kept the brass key in my palm like a prayer bead I didn't trust. Tell me again, she said low, why we're stealing from monks. Because, I answered, they've been stealing from time for 8 centuries. We're just borrowing the habit. She smiled without humor. You ever stop with the sermons? Only when they turn into confessions. At the monastery gate, a caretaker waited, thin, ageless, draped in a gray cassock, patched more than washed. His eyes were the same color as the stone. Library is closed, he said in Czech. Then we'll be quiet readers, I replied in his language. I showed the key. Vault 23. For a moment he didn't breathe. Then he nodded once, slow, and stepped aside. Follow the silence, and don't answer the bells. Inside, the monastery breathed dust. Columns leaned like tired soldiers. Frescoes flaked into pale ghosts. Somewhere far above, a pigeon cooed. reminding us that wings still worked. We moved down marble stairs into the library vaults, lanterns flickering on walls lined with chained books. The air was cold enough to feel like judgment. Claire whispered, "How did Owl get a key to this?" "Owl never steals. It persuades." At the bottom step stood a corridor with numbered doors, bronze plates worn smooth by centuries of curiosity. 17, 18, 19. Each door thicker than a bank's conscience. The brass key found its partner at 23. It turned once, cleanly, like it had been waiting for decades to hear itself used. Inside, no treasure, no guards, just a room of air that had forgotten how to move. A single steel cabinet sat in the center, modern and obscene amid medieval stone. On top, a note written in the same neat hand as Elsa Kruger's, "History is oxygen. Breathe carefully." I opened the cabinet. Inside, one reel of microfilm sealed in a tin canister labeled V45G. Beneath it, an index card, Project Gratis, Transfer Protocol Owl, Restricted Custody. Morrison, D. "Lovely," Claire muttered. "They've already written you to the footnote." I lifted the canister. Light caught the edge. Fingerprints smudged into the metal. Not mine, not hers. Both froze. "Someone's been here." She checked the door. "Maybe still is." Then we heard it. A bell tolling somewhere in the monastery above. Slow, single, deliberate. "Don't answer the bells." Claire whispered, "What does that even mean?" "Probably this." The second toll came louder, closer, vibrating the stone. Dust fell from the ceiling like confetti at a funeral. We backed toward the stairs. That's when a voice slid through the corridor, soft, educated, confident. "Mr. Morrison, you do collect souvenirs." The cafe man. He stepped into the light with two others, silhouettes sharp against the archway. No guns drawn. Just the certainty of men who think the world owes them punctuation. "You're early," I said. He smiled. "You're predictable. That's why you were chosen." Claire's tone went knife flat. "For what? Delivery or burial?" "Both," he said. "The difference is editorial." I set the canister on the floor between us. "If you wanted the film, you could have asked. We don't want it. We want to see what you do with it. Integrity is worth less when untested. Maybe I'll give it to the British. Then they'll sell it to the Americans, who'll sell it back to us. History is a market. You should know. You've been buying pieces since 43. He turned to leave, then paused. "The bells mean the monks are coming. They tend to kill whatever they pray for. I suggest you finish your footnote quickly." They vanished into the fog like punctuation marks erased mid-sentence. Claire looked at me. "He's lying, of course, but the part about monks, maybe not." The third bell hit. Thunder in a small room. Footsteps echoed above, heavy, disciplined. I tucked the film inside my coat. "We take the north stairs." We moved fast, light low. The corridor forked. From the left came the chant. Male voices, Latin words, stitched with something too rhythmic to be holy. From the right, wind and moonlight. "Right," Claire said. "Right is wrong," I answered. "So it might be right." We ran. The north stairs spat us into the library proper. Rows of ladders, towers of books chained to desks. The smell was ancient parchment and new fear. Behind us, chanting grew louder. Claire stopped, eyes darting upward. There! A service window half open near the ceiling. I boosted her up, followed, boots scraping stone. We emerged into a storeroom filled with crates labeled National Museum. She caught her breath. "We can't just keep running." "No, but we can change the story before they finish writing it." I found a rusted typewriter on a crate, still loaded with paper. Using my lighter for illumination, I typed 3 lines fast, fingers remembering code. Each line began with a letter, G-O-D. Claire read it. "You just sent a location signal?" "Not to Owl. To Horak. If he's clean, he knows what G-O-D means. And if he's not, then we just prayed to the wrong church." We made it out through a side cloister into the courtyard. The fog had turned silver, under a half moon. Bells still echoed, farther off now, like memory rather than warning. Claire stopped at the gate. "You realize if we hand that reel to anyone, we might erase half of Europe's official history." "That's the idea," I said. She looked at me, eyes raw, with something that wasn't fear anymore. What if the Owl's right? Maybe they're the only ones keeping truth from rotting. Then truth's in worse shape than we thought. We walked down the hill, the city below glowing faintly like an open wound trying to... When we reached the bridge, a car waited, black, unmarked, engine purring, soft. The driver stepped out, Horak. He looked older, like he'd been awake since the war started. "You have something for me?" "Depends who you work for this morning." He held up his hands. "Not the Soviets, not the British, maybe not even the Allies anymore, just for the city." "Then the city's lucky," Claire said, voice edged with distrust. I handed him the canister. He weighed it like sin. "Do you know what's on this?" "No." "That's your problem now." He nodded. "If you're smart, you'll disappear. The owl has many eyes." We noticed. He got in the car and drove away. The sound faded into fog until it was just us and the river's slow up. Claire looked back up at Strahov. "Do you think he'll open it?" "I think," I said, "that whatever's on that reel was never meant to be read by anyone still breathing." She gave a small, tired laugh. "Then we're safe, until someone rewrites the ending." The fog thickened, muffling the bells. I felt the weight of my empty pocket. The key had been. Maybe that's what spies collect most. Not secrets, not money, not medals, just missing keys. We crossed the bridge into the sleeping city. Above us, an owl called once from the cathedral roof. Soft, precise, indifferent. Somewhere behind it, I imagined the archivist of the dead filing our names under temporary. Prague burns differently at night. Not with fire, but with memory. The smoke is gone. The bombs have the streets still glow, as if the stones themselves haven't forgiven us. By dawn, the fog had swallowed the river again. Claire and I walked through it like ghosts who hadn't realized they were dead. We'd handed the reel to Horak, and for a moment I believed the story was over. You see, the first rule of espionage is that nothing ends. The second rule is that everyone who says, "Trust me," should be treated as armed. We reached the Charles Bridge just as the church bells began to toll. Not alarm, not ceremony, just exhaustion. Claire leaned against the railing, watching the black water slide beneath the arches. "You think he'll open it?" she asked. I shook my head. "Men like Horak don't open things. They deliver them to people who promise not to. Then we're back where we started." "No," I said. "We're deeper in the same circle." That morning we split up. Claire went to check if our extraction route still existed. It rarely did, while I returned to the Bäckerei Hoffmann, my old office above the ruins of a bakery in Salzburg, or what was left of it. The train south was half empty, half asleep. Refugees, soldiers, widows. The categories had blended by then. I tried to read, but the headlines were the same across every country. Victory, reconstruction, hope. Words printed too soon. When I reached Salzburg, the streets looked smaller. The city had been shrinking to hide from history. The bakery's roof was gone. The walls burned. Someone had carved words into the soot by the door. Truth is a currency. Inside, the place smelled my mattress, but someone had gone through the room. Not looters. Professional. Drawers half closed, matches unstruck. A map pinned upside down. The kind of disorder that says, "We looked carefully." On the table sat a note in perfect English handwriting. "We warned you not to deliver the film." Oh, owl. Or maybe just someone pretending to. I burned the note in a tin cup, watched it curl into black lace. The smoke drifted up through the hole in the ceiling, like a prayer I didn't mean. That's when the knock came. Soft, deliberate. I reached for the pistol under the table. "Daniel." "It's me." "Claire." She stepped in, wet from rain, eyes darker than before. "They found Horak." "Barely. They dragged him out of the river by the iron bridge. Bullet in the lung." "He talked?" He coughed up. "Yours." We left the city before noon, heading east again, this time by truck. Every mile felt borrowed. Claire drove while I tried to make sense of the puzzle we'd built and lost control of. Owl knew we'd deliver the film. They wanted it in motion. Bait on a... Bait for who? For whoever still believes in government. That narrows it down to about 12 people in Europe. Then I'll start with them. We reached the Austrian border at dusk. The checkpoint was abandoned except for a dog sleeping beside a rusted gate. The sky was the color of gunmetal, that shade between peace and the next mistake. We stopped, engine idling. Neither of us moved. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "if maybe Owl isn't an organization at all? Maybe it's just a collection of people who remember too much." "Could be. That's how revolutions start. Or religions." She turned off the engine. "And what are we? Apocrypha. The stories they cut out." We spent the night in an abandoned farmhouse near Linz. Rain tapped on the roof in Morse code. I didn't want to translate. Claire slept in the chair, pistol on her lap. I sat by the window, watching lightning roll across the... Every flash turned the world in frozen, perfect. I thought about Elsa Kruger and her calm voice saying, "Redundancy is salvation. Copies survive better than..." That's when I noticed the reflection in the window. Faint, a glint of movement. I didn't turn. Spoke. "If you came to finish it, at least pour yourself a drink first." The intruder chuckled. "Mail? Familiar? You were never hard to find, Morrison." I turned. The cafe man, Owl's mouthpiece, stood in the doorway, soaked from rain, pistol holstered, expression patient. "You've been busy, delivering things you shouldn't, asking questions. No one survives asking. Then you came to thank me?" "To clarify." He stepped close, shoes leaving small wet ghosts. "The film you delivered wasn't the archive." Claire stirred, pistol already rising. He lifted a hand. "Please, I'm not here for violence. I'm here for accuracy." I frowned. "Then what was on the reel?" "Names," he said, "but not of spies or scientists, of witnesses, survivors. Every person who saw something the new governments don't want to remember." Claire lowered her gun, uncertain. "So Owl's trying to protect them?" "Protect?" He laughed softly. "No. We're documenting extinction. The death of truth must be recorded, or it becomes myth." I stepped closer. "Then why warn me?" "Because myths need narrator." He handed me inside a photograph taken from behind at Strahov Monastery. 2 silhouettes crossing the courtyard in fog. Claire and me. Beneath it, a caption handwritten in blue ink. "City burns twice, once in fire, once in memory." He turned to leave. "Owl isn't done with you, Morris. You still have chapters left." Then he was melting into rain. Claire looked at the photo, her voice low. "Do you think we'll ever stop being in someone else's story?" The rain will run out of film. "And until then?" "Until then, rewriting." Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Not angry, just tired. The kind of thunder that sounds like old gods closing their books. I tucked the photo into my coat pocket beside the pistol. The ink was still wet. The city might have stopped burning on maps, but in our heads, the fire hadn't even begun to cool. And somewhere, in a vault we'd never see, a file was already being written. Daniel Morrison, witness to the second burning. Morning arrived like a lie, all light, no warmth. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. Claire and I packed our things in ritual silence. 2 soldiers after a war that no one remembered declaring. We didn't talk about the photograph. You don't discuss a noose while it's tightening. We drove north, through valleys where the world looked almost new. Green hills, yellow fields, children chasing broken kites. The war had passed like a storm here, leaving behind puddles that reflected only blue sky. But peace is just the polite word people use for intermission. By midday, we stopped at a roadside cafe outside Brno. A single woman served watery soup to travelers who couldn't afford to care what it tasted. Claire stirred hers slowly. "You ever think about quitting?" she asked. I did. Then the war decided it wasn't done with me. You could disappear, change your name again. I've already changed it too many times. At some point you start answering to the wrong one." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a man rehearsing his eulogy. Maybe I'm just tired of practicing resurrection." We didn't speak again until the soup was gone. We reached Prague before dusk. The city looked softer this time, as if guilt exhausted it. The cathedral bells rang somewhere behind the fog, steady as a metronome, counting down the last of something. Claire had arranged a meeting through one of her British contacts. A man named Colonel Sykes, supposedly debriefing agents being rotated home. The rendezvous was in an abandoned theater on Revolutionary Street. Appropriate name. The place was dust and velvet, the kind of grandeur that dies politely. The seats were ripped open, the stage half collapsed. A single bulb glowed center stage, humming like an insect. Sykes was already there, tall, lean, mustache drawn by geometry. His uniform looked recently pressed, his conscience less so. "Morrison," voice dry as chalk. "Heard your name whispered and interested. That's never good." He offered cigarettes. I declined. Claire didn't. "Let's get to it. You wanted the reel. It's gone." "Gone? That's a creative word." "Delivered. To a man named Horak. Czech resistance." Sykes exhaled smokes. "Ah, the same Horak who was found floating in the Vltava 2 nights ago?" Claire froze. "You already knew." "I know everything worth knowing, including that you, Mr. Morrison, have been consorting with a network calling itself Owl." He used the name carefully, like it might bite. And sorting? You make it sound romantic. Isn't it? He replied. Two sides of the same coin falling through history's fingers. He paced toward the stage, his boots creaking on wood that didn't trust him. We've been intercepting transmissions for weeks. Messages marked with your initials. You've been writing reports to nobody. I write to keep from forgetting. And what have you learned? That forgetting is government policy. He chuckled. You sound like them. Maybe they sound like me. Claire stepped between us. Sykes, what do you want? The film. And the woman, Elsa Kruger. She's gone. Vanished. He nodded, unsurprised. Then find her ghost. That night I couldn't. The hotel room we'd taken near the river was quiet, the kind of quiet that studies you. Claire slept on the bed, one hand on her pistol, the other under her. I sat by the window, staring at the photograph the cafe man had given me, the one labeled City Burns twice. The ink had blurred from moisture, but the shapes were still there. Two figures in fog walking away from something they didn't know was on. Then I noticed something I had. In the lower corner, almost hidden by shadow, a third shape, a reflection in the puddle beside. Another man, watching. Camera in. I looked closer. The shape of his coat, the tilt of his. Colonel Sykes. The realization felt cold enough to taste. At dawn, I woke Claire. We've been working for the owl since the beginning. She blinked. What? Sykes isn't who he says he is. He's part of it. Maybe even the head. Every order we followed, every contact, it's been staged. Then what about the film? Was that even real? Maybe it never mattered. Maybe they just wanted to see what we'd do when we thought it did. Test subject. Witnesses, I said, temporary ones. We packed quickly. As we reached the hallway, I heard the click. Faint, metallic, final. A camera shutter. Then the gunfire started. Glass shattered. Plaster dust filled the air. Claire dragged me down the stairwell as bullets chased echoes. We burst out the side door into an alley full of smoke and pigeons. Who? Does it matter? They're writing the ending. We ran through side streets toward the river. The city was awake now. Soldiers shouting, civilians ducking, life pretending not to notice, death rehearsing its. We reached a bridge, half shrouded in fog. I could see the reflection of our movement below. Two ghosts in water again. Then I saw him, Sykes, standing on the far side, coat perfect, pistol drawn, face almost sad. It's over, Morrison. You're out of pages. I raised my hand. Then, write a better ending. Claire lifted her gun. Don't. But Sykes didn't aim for her. He aimed higher, at the sky, at the sound above us. A single owl cry echoed through the mist. Then a flash. The bullet hit something I couldn't see. The sound was wrong, like metal striking glass. The air shimmered, and then silence. When the fog cleared, Sykes was gone. No body, no blood, just the faint smell of burned film. Claire looked at me. What did he shoot? I shook my head. Maybe the last She frowned. You mean us? No. Softly. Whoever was still recording? We stood there a long time, the city waking around us, bells calling names neither of us answered to anymore. And somewhere, I knew, a new file was being written. Title, Operation Gratis terminated. Subtitle, Witness status, uncertain. That night, I found the old Minox camera in my pocket. I hadn't remembered taking it. Inside was a single frame, undeveloped. I held it up to the light. Two figures walking through fog, Claire and me. This time, no third shadow. Maybe that's what survival really means. Just outlasting the photographer. Night has its own kind of democracy. Everyone gets the same shadows, the same fear, the same chance to disappear. After the bridge, after Sykes vanished into smoke and logic stopped meaning anything, Claire and I didn't run. We drifted. There's a difference. Running implies direction. Drifting just means you've stopped believing in maps. We moved west through the old quarter, past churches missing their steeples and cafes that smelled of candle wax and gun oil. Every window reflected someone else's version of spies, traitors, survivors, ghosts. By the time the clock struck midnight, we found ourselves in Yosifov, the Jewish quarter, where every brick seemed to whisper names it still refused to forget. We stopped under an archway carved with Hebrew letters that time hadn't managed to erase. Claire looked at me. You think we're the last ones? Of what? People who remember how to lie for the right reason, but it didn't last. No one remembers the reason, only the lies. We were supposed to be free now. War ended, borders, enemies neatly labeled. But in my experience, peace is just the quiet part. We hid in a cellar beneath an old bookshop. The owner, an old man with half the courage, didn't ask questions. He pointed to a corner and said, "No one comes here after midnight. The owls own the hours." Claire raised no. "The owls?" He nodded. "You'll hear them." He wasn't wrong. Around 2 a.m, the air began to hum, not from wings, but from frequency. A radio signal, faint, buried under static. I tuned my Minox's receiver, half expecting ghosts. What came through was worse. Gratis complete, witness unconfirmed. Archive resets at dawn. Claire froze. "That's them," I'll transmit. "Encrypted. Lazy. They're confident. Confident people make only when they still believe in consequence." I pulled out a small notebook, the last one I hadn't burned, and started writing the message. Words are safer when they bleed onto paper. Machines forget too quickly. Then, as the city itself had decided to answer, church bells began to ring. All of them, from every quarter. Out of sync, out of mercy. Claire looked up. "What the hell is happening?" "Synchronization test. They're aligning time signals. Midnight in their system, the hour of the owls." "You mean they control the clocks?" "They control what people remember about." We moved out before dawn, guided by the bell echo. Each one pointed toward the same hill, Vyšehrad, the oldest fortress in Prague. Legends say it's where the first kings ruled and where they buried the ones who tried to rewrite their prophecies. As we climbed, fog clung to the statue like unspoken guilt. At the top, we found what we didn't want to find, a convoy of black trucks parked in a perfect circle. No soldiers, no flags, no noise, just waiting. Claire crouched behind a stone wall. Who are they moving? Not people. Memories. We crept closer. Through a crack in the gate, I saw them unloading boxes. Film reels, photo plates, documents sealed in wax, each stamped with a single word, owl. There must have been hundreds, maybe thousands. Claire whispered, "This is the archive, or the nest." A figure stood by the trucks issuing orders, not Sykes, someone taller, older. His hair was white, but his movements were sharp. The cafe man, still alive, still calm. He turned suddenly, looking straight toward the wall that hid us, and smiled. "You were never meant to escape." Voice carrying easily through the fog. "No one." Claire raised her pistol. How the hell?" "He's not talking to us," I said quietly. "He's broadcasting." The fog around us shimmered faintly. Not mist, not smoke, but light. Hidden projectors flickered on from the trucks, casting images across the walls of the fortress. Faces, thousands of them. Men, women, soldiers, scientists, children. Every one of them staring back at us. Claire whispered, "What is this?" "The archive. The record of everyone who remembered too much." The cafe distorted through speakers. "Truth dies only when the last witness stops speaking. You two have lasted longer than most, but stories, like wars, need endings." I shouted, "What do you want from us?" "To complete the file." Claire fired once toward the speakers, a crack of defiance swallowed by stone. The image flickered, but the voice didn't stop. "Peace was the lie," he continued. "You both helped us prove it. The film you delivered was empty, Morrison. The real archive is this city. Every stone, every scar, every silence. You can burn paper, but you can't burn echoes." The light intensified, faces multiplying until the walls glowed like stained glass from hell. Then came another sound. Not bells this time, but engines. Dozens. Trucks starting to move. Claire grabbed my arm. "They're leaving." "No," I said. "They're scattering, copying the archive." Each truck pulled away in a different direction, disappearing into the fog like thoughts erased on purpose. I ran to the nearest one, fired into its tires, yanked open the back doors. Inside, reels stacked to the ceiling, hundreds labeled with names I recognized. Weiss, Kruger, Sykes, Morrison. One reel sat on top, labeled simply, "The Last Witness." Stared at it. My name wasn't written, but it didn't need to be. Claire whispered, "What do we do?" "End it." I grabbed a flare gun from a supply crate, aimed at the reels, and fired. The flare hissed through the dark, igniting film, paper, air. The truck erupted into color. Red, orange, white. Memories turning to ash in seconds. Flames spread fast. Another truck caught, then another. The fog became firelight. The fortress glowed. The city burned again, quietly. We ran until the heat faded behind us. The sun was rising, pale and distant. Claire stopped, coughing smoke. Did we stop them? No, I said. We just made them harder to find. She looked at me, tired, furious, alive. And what does that make us? Extinct, I said, but maybe useful fossils. We stood on the hill, watching the smoke drift over the river. Somewhere below, the bells began again, out of tune, out of time. I took the Minox camera from my pocket, opened it, and exposed the last frame to the morning light. What are you doing? She erasing us. The sun broke over Prague like a confession, and for a brief moment, everything looked clean. No spies, no archives, no witnesses. Just two people too stubborn to die before the truth did. And somewhere, in a file, a vault, or a story, the hour of the owls began again. The war ended twice. First on paper, with signatures, parades, and photographs, and then again, quietly, when men like me stopped believing the signatures meant anything. After the fire at Vyšehrad, Prague slept under a veil of smoke and denial. The newspapers called it an accident, a supply explosion from leftover German munitions. No mention of trucks, no mention of archives, no mention of faces on the walls that glowed like ghosts. Claire and I hid in a safe house on the southern edge of the city, a one-room apartment above a locksmith. Fitting, considering how many doors we'd broken into just to find more locks behind them. She sat by the window, stitching a tear in her. Her hands moved with calm precision, like she was trying to sew her thoughts shut. I sat at the table, listening to the faint rattle of tram wheels on cobblestones below. Normal life was returning, or at least the illusion of it. The kind of peace that people build from rubble and lies. Do you ever feel, she said suddenly, like we didn't survive anything at all? Like we just switched wars? I looked up. We did. We're just fighting the quiet part now. She nodded slowly. The silence between wars. The knock came just after midnight. 3 short, 2 long. Claire and I exchanged a look. She reached for her pistol. I reached for my patience. I opened the door an inch. Outside stood a boy, maybe 14, wrapped in a coat too big for him, mud on his fear in his eye. He handed me an envelope, whispered, "From the library," and vanished into the fog before I could ask which one. The envelope bore no seal, only an owl feather pressed flat inside the paper. Fragile, deliberate. Inside, a single sentence written in Elsa Kruger's precise handwriting. The archive was never in the vault, it was in the signal. I read it twice before speaking. She's alive, Claire frowned. Or they want us to think she... Either way, I said, she's calling us back. The next morning, we followed the message to where all ghosts eventually go, the radio tower on Petrine Hill. It had survived the bombings mostly intact, though its metal skeleton looked like something half-eaten by light. At the base, 2 Czech guards in tattered uniforms were arguing over ration cards. Claire flashed forged papers and smiled, the kind of smile that ends arguments. They let us through without a question. Inside, the air buzzed with electricity and dust. Old transmitters hummed softly, waiting to be remembered. On a desk sat a typewriter, its keys blackened by age, and next to it, a single reel of tape labeled G-Sequence 11. I threaded it into the recorder and hit play. Static. Then a voice. Not Elsa's, not the cafe man's, mine. "This is Daniel Morrison, field agent. Date unknown. Operation Gratis. Compromised. All witnesses missing. I repeat, missing. If this recording is found, the archive still exists. It lives in the frequencies. You can't kill a signal." Claire stared at me. "When did you record that?" "I didn't." The voice continued. "To the next me, the one who survives long enough to listen, find the second key, the one they hid in the fire. You'll know it by its sound." Then silence. Claire exhaled. "You left yourself a message, or someone did, pretending to be me. Which one scares you more?" "Both." We spent hours combing through the tower, searching every drawer's shadow, every frequency still alive in the wires. Around sunset, the sky outside turned copper, and the whole structure began to hum again. A transmission, faint but real. I adjusted the dial until the static cleared enough to hear words, fragmented, layered like multiple voices speaking through the same throat. "Gratis? Reinitialize?" Morrison confirmed. "Witness loop active," Claire whispered. "They're still transmitting." "Not they, it." Because somewhere along the way, I realized the truth. OWL wasn't just a network. It had become an organism, built from signals, memories, names, A machine that feeds on what people forget. The lights flickered. One of the transmitters clicked to life on its own, dials spinning without touch. The Morse light began to flash across the room. 3 short, 2 long. G. Then, beneath the hum, a faint metallic sound, a key turning in a lock that wasn't there. I looked at Claire. That's it. She nodded, pulled out her notebook. The second key. I reached toward the radio. And maybe the next war. Outside, night fell over Prague. From the tower we could see the entire city, quiet, fragile, pretending to rest. But down there in the distance, I could still see them. Black trucks moving along the bridges, headlights blinking in formation. Claire followed my gaze. You think they rebuilt the archive? They never stopped. She tucked her hair behind her ear, eyes hard now. Then what do? We stop chasing ghosts, I said. We become them. She turned to me, understanding slow but solid. Disappear into the frequency. Exactly. I turned on the transmitter again, tuned it to 11.11 MHz, the frequency Owl always used for internal test signals, and pressed record. This is Daniel Morrison transmitting for the last time, or the first, depending who's listening. We burned the files, but the fire never ends. The silence between wars is just the sound of history catching its breath. If you hear this, you're already part of it. I stopped the tape, rewound it halfway, then let it play on loop. The tower filled with my own voice, echoing back at the static, over and over, like a mantra or a curse. Claire whispered, "You realize what this means, don't you?" I nodded. "It means we just became part of the archive." Dawn painted the horizon pink, soft, and cruel. The city below started to wake, unaware that its new day had already been recorded. I leaned against the rail, watching the fog dissolve into sunlight. Behind me, tape still played, my own voice fading into noise. You can't kill a signal. I closed my eye, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It just waited. The first thing I noticed when I woke up wasn't light. It was rhythm. A faint pulse in the air, like a heartbeat wrapped in static. It came from the radio, or maybe from me. Claire was still asleep on the floor beside the transmitter, her hand resting on her pistol, the way a believer rests on a cross. The tape reel was still spinning, but the words had changed. My voice, or something wearing it, was saying things I'd never recorded. The signal doesn't forget, Daniel. You do. Every time you burn a note, erase a face, leave a city behind, it keeps the original. The archive remembers. I reached for the switch, but Claire woke before I touched it. Her eyes snapped open, calm, alert, like she'd been waiting for the world to make sense again and was disappointed it hadn't. "You hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah. It's your voice." "I know." We listened in silence. The tape crackled again, then continued. "If you're still listening, it means the loop is complete. You found the tower, you found the reel, you burned the trucks. But fire doesn't destroy memory, Daniel. It transmits it. Energy never dies. It just changes listeners." The word stopped. Static swallowed everything. Claire exhaled. "How the hell?" I shook my head. That tape was blank when we found it. Or maybe it just needed us to remember. We left the tower before sunrise. The air outside smelled of wet stone and ozone, the scent of cities that have seen too much electricity and not enough murder. Down in the streets, people were already queuing for bread. No one looked up at the tower, even though its antennae still glowed faintly, like nervous stars. Claire walked beside me, collar turned up, eyes scanning rooftops. "If the signal remembers us," she said, "does that mean we can talk back?" "You can't talk to a mirror. It only answers when you stop existing," she smirked. "Then maybe that's the trick." By noon we reached the outskirts of the city. Trains were running again, mostly eastbound to Vienna, Budapest, or whatever pieces of Berlin were still pretending to function. I found a cafe near the freight yards, the kind of place where spies and sinners shared the same menu. The waitress didn't ask for names, which made her the most professional person I'd met all week. Claire stirred her coffee, lost in thought. "You know what I keep wondering?" "What?" "If we're just part of someone's transmission. If all of this, the wars, the archives, the signals, it's just data looping through time. And maybe OWL isn't an organization at all. Maybe it's history trying to stay alive." I looked out the window, watching the fog shift over the tracks. "Then history has a terrible sense of humor," she smiled softly. "Maybe it learned it from us." The cafe radio crackled. A newscaster's voice, Czech, then German, then English, cutting between languages like static between frequencies. Reports continue regarding unexplained transmissions over shortwave, repeated phrases in multiple languages, all beginning with a single letter, G. Claire froze. It's spreading. The signal's not staying in Prague. Then neither can we. We paid with forged bills and left before the coffee. We boarded a westbound train under false names. Mine this time was Thomas Crane. Hers, Eva Adler. We sat in silence, surrounded by strangers who all pretended not to notice the world rebuilding itself around them, like a liar rearranging his story. As the train rattled toward Vienna, I tried to sleep. The sound of the tracks became Morse in my head. 3 short, 2 long. G, over and over, like the pulse of something that refused to die. When I opened my eyes, the compartment was empty. Claire was gone. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but her coat still hung on the seat beside her pistol, her notebook. Then the radio, the one built into the train wall, hissed to life. "Daniel Morrison," the voice said, calm and clear. "We need to finish the story." It was Claire's voice, but not hers, colder, controlled, like someone had flattened her tone into something engineered. "You wanted to talk to the signal. Now you are." I stood scanning the corridor, empty, the passengers' doors all shut. The lights flickered, each flash a frame of a film I couldn't see. "Where are you?" "Still here, but maybe not where you think. You brought the loop with you, Daniel. Every word you ever burned, every file you ever erased." It followed. The train entered a tunnel. Everything went black except the red glow from the radio dial. "You can't kill a signal. You can only join it." Then the voice faded into static, and in the distance, through the hum, I heard my own voice again, layered behind hers. "Find the second key." When the train emerged from the tunnel, sunlight hit like confession. Claire was back in her seat, or pretending. I watched her for a long time. She breathed evenly, one hand still resting near her gun, but her other hand, the left one, twitched occasionally, tapping the table. 3 short, 2 long. G. I reached out, touched her wrist gently. "Claire." Her eyes opened slowly, not confused, aware. "You heard it too," she said. "Yeah." Then it started. "Warwigs. What has?" "The signal remembering us. That night we crossed into Austria. The border guards barely looked up. Too tired, too bribed, too human. I handed over our papers, smiled the right amount, and the gate lifted like mercy, pretending to be metal. We rented a room in Vienna, near the Danube. The walls were thin, the air thick with cigarette smoke and piano echoes from a club next door. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, removing the bullets from her gun one by one. "You ever wonder how many versions of us exist out there now?" "All of them. Every time the signal replays, it builds another copy." She looked up, eyes softer than deserved. "Then maybe that's how we survive, by being remembered?" "No," by becoming the memory itself. Later, after she'd fallen asleep, I turned on the radio again. The same frequency, 1111 MHz, static. Then faint music, a woman humming. Claire's voice, only older. Then she spoke. "You can stop running now, Daniel. The second key isn't a thing, it's a place, and you've already been there." The line clicked. Silence. I stared at the radio until dawn, trying to decide whether I'd just heard the future or the past, looping back. Outside, Vienna was waking to a new day. Soft light, busy streets, people pretending history was finished. But in the static between the music stations, I could still hear it, my name, her voice, the signal that remembered us. And I knew then, the war hadn't ended. It had just changed frequency. The message said the second key wasn't a thing. It was a place. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark hotel room, Vienna breathing outside the window like an animal too large to see. Cars, voices, wind, all moving in rhythm, like the city had a heartbeat again. But somewhere under that pulse, I could hear it, the faint hiss of the frequency, buried inside the night like static in a confession. When Claire woke, I was still at the window, staring at the reflection of my own eyes in the glass. They didn't look like mine anymore. She stretched, slow, careful, as if testing whether she was still real. "You didn't sleep." "No." "Still hearing it?" "Everywhere," I said. "In the hum of the lights, in the radio, even in the pipes." She poured 2 cups of black coffee and handed me one. "Maybe it's not following us. Maybe we're inside it now." I looked at her, You think we've been transmitted? She shrugged. We recorded ourselves, didn't we? The tower broadcast your voice, your message. Once it's out there, how do you separate the signal from the man? I didn't have an answer. Maybe she didn't expect one. By noon, we were walking through the Innere Stadt, the oldest part of Vienna, narrow alleys, war-stained walls, buildings still pretending to be whole. I carried a folded map, though I didn't need it. The signal guided me. Every time we turned the wrong way, the static grew louder in my ears. It led us to a church, St. Rupert's, oldest in the city, small, humble, and somehow untouched. Inside, the air smelled of wax and old wood. A few candles flickered near the altar. An old priest knelt by the confessional, head bowed, whispering to a God that hadn't answered in years. Claire stayed near the door. I walked toward the altar. The noise in my head grew clearer. Not random static now, but rhythm. 3 short, 2 long. Gee. Then a whisper, faint, mechanical, layered under the hum of the old organ pipes. Welcome back, Daniel. I froze. The voice came from the wall. A hidden speaker? A wire embedded behind the stones? Claire tensed. You hear it? I nodded. It's here, the whisper continued. You've found the vault. You burned the archive. You became the witness. Now you must open the second key. A low tone vibrated through the floor, and one of the flagstones near the altar cracked slightly, revealing the edge of a metal panel. But clerics, they built something, or buried some. We pried the slab open together. Beneath it, a staircase descending into darkness. The air smelled of dust, oil, and memory. The tunnel was narrow, lit by faint blue bulbs strung like breadcrumbs. Each step downward felt like walking back into history's lungs. At the bottom stood a steel door, rusted but alive, etched into its surface. G2. The second key. Claire touched that. It's cold. Everything. We pushed it up. Inside was no archive, just a single room, circular, walls lined with hundreds of small radio and tape machines, each labeled with a date and a name. In the center, on a chair, sat Elsa Kruger, or close enough to... Her hair was silver now, still surgical, cutting through the dim light. Scalpel was wondering how long it would... Claire raised her gun. Don't move. Elsa, still loyal. Good, you'll need... I stepped closer. You're supposed to be dead. She tilted her head. So are most of us. She gestured around the room. This is the second key, the place where all versions converge. The broadcasts, the files, the voices, they all pass through here before being reborn. I frowned. Reborn? Retransmitted, she said. Corrected. Preserved. The signal you've been hearing isn't following you, Daniel. It's becoming you. Claire's voice was sharp. You turned people into transmissions, Elsa. It was the only way to save them. Paper burns. Bodies die, but frequency endures. Energy doesn't vanish. It changes form. OWL was never a spy network. It was an arc. An arc, I repeat, for consciousness. The minds of those who saw too much encoded into the frequencies. The world will forget everything else, but not the voices. And us, I asked, why drag us into it? Because you've already joined. The tower recorded you. Every word you sent, every sound you made. You and Claire are already archived, fragments pulsing through every radio in Europe. I felt my stomach tighten. Then, what's the second key? Elsa stood, slower than she used to. A choice. She reached into her coat and pulled out 2 small metal capsules, polished, unmarked, humming faintly. One will sever your link to the archive. You'll disappear completely. No memory, no trace. The other will complete the transmission. You'll survive forever, but only as echoes in the signal. Claire's hand trembled slightly on her pistol. You want us to decide how we die? Elsa smiled gently. No, how you'll be remembered. The hum of the machines filled the silence between us. I could feel the static crawling through the air. Not noise anymore, but language. Words half-formed, names whispered. The living chorus of everyone OWL had ever taken. Claire looked at me. You trust her? No, but she's not lying. Then what do we do? We make sure no one else gets to choose. I grabbed the capsules from Elsa's hand and hurled them into the wall of machines. Sparks flew, wires hissed, light stuttered. The hum turned into a scream, 1,000 voices collapsing at once. Elsa shouted, You fool! You can't destroy it. Not destroying, I said. Rewriting. I grabbed Claire's hand. Run. The machines began to overload. reels spinning faster, static surging like thunder. The blue lights turned white, the floor shook. As we ran up the stairs, I heard Elsa's voice echo behind us, not angry, not afraid, just resigned. Every witness leaves a copy, Daniel, even you. The door slammed above us. We burst back into the church, coughing smoke and electricity. The candles on the altar had gone out. Outside, the city was completely no trams, no radio, just stillness, the kind that Claire looked at me. We stop it? I listened to the air. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep under the earth, 3 short, 2 long. Gee. I exhaled. No, we just taught it to. Silence is only peaceful when it ends. When it doesn't, it becomes a verdict. Vienna held its breath for an hour that wouldn't pass. No tram bells, no radios leaking waltzes, no dogs announcing the mail. Just a city, like a photograph, left too long in developer. Details surfacing that you didn't want to. We stood in the doorway of Rupert's, listening to nothing. Claire pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A beat, another. You have a pulse? I asked. She nodded, then frowned and tried again. Yes, but it feels out of phase, like I'm hearing it before I feel it. I checked my own. 2 rhythms argued under my skin. One was mine, slow, stubborn. The other belonged to the wire that had been following us since Prague, 3 short, 2 long. A code learning to pretend it was blood. We moved. Shops were open but unmanned, doors yawning like someone had just stepped out and forgotten how to step back in. A newsboy sat on a stoop with papers stacked at his. Reconstruction continues. The headline stuttered as if embarrassed. He stared past us, not blind, not frozen, listening to the same blank that wrapped this. Sir? Claire said. He blinked and looked at her lips. Were subtitles to a silent film. Are you actors? No, I said, witnessing. He nodded like that made sense, and went back to listening. We crossed to the river. The Danube looked like polished slate, unbothered by the absence of music. Halfway over the bridge, Claire stopped and crouched. Daniel. Our shadows lay at our feet. Hers wasn't touching her boot. A thumb's width of light separated leather from darkness, as if the shadow had forgotten. When she lifted her hand, the shadow followed a breath, fingers blooming in black, a fraction of her skin. Out of phase. I stepped so my shadow merged with hers. For an instant, both ripples aligned. One body with 2 silhouettes. Then mine slid away, not to my feet, but toward the parapet, stretching thin as a confession. We're leaking. Into what? She whispered. Where all leaks go, down. She stared at the water, face set. Then we go down. It isn't hard to find the underworld of a city if you know the seams, utility half cellars, maintenance doors that look like masonry, until they decide you're worth telling the truth to. We cut through an arcade off Rotenturmstrasse and followed the smell of wet stone to a door with no handle. Someone had painted over the keyhole. Someone else had painted over. Claire knelt and tapped the panel with a rhythmic. 3 short, 2 long. A bolt slid back inside the wall as if it had been waiting 50 years to be acknowledged. The corridor breathed cold at us. We went in. Light bulbs dangled without filaments. Still they glowed. A grayish radiance that made edges honest and surfaces mournful. Our steps didn't echo. The air held them like secrets it had no pocket. The corridor opened into a chamber so tall the ceiling felt like a rumor. At its center, a metal frame like the skeleton of a greenhouse, but with no glass, just strings stretching from floor to rafters, taut as violin wire. On each string, hundreds of small panels hung, thin plates of smoked mica or film, translucent and trembling. With every draft, the plates quivered and threw shadows on the wall, faces that appeared and smudged, rooms that weren't this room, hands writing on paper, the air. Claire breathed, "What is it?" An archive. After the fire, after the reels. This is how the signal keeps what light refuses. A panel heeled toward us on its wire. A woman's silhouette in profile formed, crisp, then frayed. She turned, and for a second I saw her mouth shape a word I knew too well. Remember. Elsa. But the mouth was mine now. Then Sykes's. Then a child. The shadow plates clattered softly like rain on tin as the room shifted moods. Every image was a subtraction, the shape of what light didn't hit. The persistence of omission. Claire lifted her hand toward the plate and stopped an inch away. If I touch it, do I change it? Everything touches everything, I said. That's the trick the frequency learned. We circled the frame. Names were scratched small on the metal uprights, vertical as prayers. Weiss, Kruger, Horak, Morrison. Next to my name, a line etched deeper lately. Witness unstable. I'm not fond of editorializing. From somewhere behind the frame, a voice answered. Then stop giving them content. The caretaker from the monastery in Prague, gray cassock, stone eyes. He held a lantern that cast no light and a keyring with no key. You tend more churches than one. I tend threshold, places where the living and the recorded are. Claire, is this one of Owl's nests? He shook his head gently. Owl isn't a thing that nests. It molts. Every silence is a shed skin. He walked to the frame and flicked one string with a finger. The plate chimed. No, it spoke. A whisper shaped by vibration. The city burns twice. He looked at me. You've been very noisy. Sometimes shouting is the only way to be heard over history, and sometimes whispering is the only way to survive. He pointed to the far wall. There, a door too small for the room tried to be modest. On it, G0 carved with something patient. Room 0, Claire said. Before the first key? Before labels. Before the archive learned to prefer its own memory. Who keeps it? I asked. He smiled the way people do when learned to love hard answers. The shadows. He left us, lantern unlit but brighter than the bulbs, and the corridor closed behind him as if he had taught it manners. Claire faced the small door. We open it? We're past asking authorization. The handle was cold the way time is cold when it misplaces you. The door swung inward without complaint. Room 0 was an antechamber to nothing. No strings, no plates, a bench, a wall painted dark, not black, like midnight diluted with ash. On that wall our shadows stood already, waiting for us. They were taller than any right to be, and thinner than fear. Claire stepped forward, and so did her shadow, but not in consent, in anticipation, like it had been practiced. It lifted its right hand when she lifted her left. It looked at me when she looked at the door. Daniel. The word trembled but didn't break. If we're already echoes, how do we become choices again? By choosing to be small, I said. Not myth, not archive, just two people who keep a promise. What promise? To finish what we actually started, not what they recorded us starting. I walked to the wall and placed my palm where my shadow's palm waited. There was no glass, no chill, just a pressure, like wind pretending to be a memory. The shadow's fingers didn't match mine. They overlapped, then found the rhythm. 3 short, 2 long. We tapped together, not code now, but cadence. A door I couldn't see breathed open somewhere inside the paint. The wall brightened from within, less dark. And in that thinning, an image formed the way negatives become positives when you decide they've earned it. A room, a table, a map of Europe with no borders, only filaments. At the map's center, a pulsing point, not Prague, not Vienna, south, east, a city that has changed its names as often as spies change their faces. Belgrade, Claire said. The pulse ticked in our bones. G under the map, letters bloomed as if stamped by a patient machine. Archive of Shadows, Field Node, Beograd Film Lab, Cosmage, Sublevel 3, Do Not Transmit, Do Not Kill, Revise. Claire's breath left her like relief had remembered its job. Revise. They're telling us the only thing they can't do themselves, because revision requires living contradiction, flesh arguing with its own record. I took my hand away from the wall. My shadow stayed a moment longer, as if reluctant to lose me. Then it slid free and came back to my feet like a dog that isn't sure you deserve it but has decided to serve anyway. Claire looked down. Her shadow now touched her boots. It matched her hand when she lifted it. The delay was there, a heartbeat thin, but less than. We're not dead yet, completely. Enough life to be inconvenient. We left room 0. The strings outside hummed as we passed, a low choir that didn't need lyrics. At the corridor, the caretaker was gone, as were our footprint. The door that had admitted us had become wall again, stone that remembered it hadn't liked being useful. On the street, the silence had changed flavor. Radios still refused to speak, bells withheld their absolutions, but the quiet now felt curated, not absolute. The world wasn't empty, it was editing. Claire took my arm like partners do when they've decided to dance through a minefield. Belgrade, Beograd, and she almost smiled. We'll need papers, petrol, and the kind of patience that gets men killed when they remember they were born impatient. And we'll need to be smaller than our myths. We'll leave the myths here, I said, looking back toward the earth that had learned to archive absence. Let the shadows do the boasting. We walked, and with each block our steps made more sound. Not much, shoe leather whispering to cobblestone, coats negotiating with wind. Enough to assure the city we hadn't abandoned it to its own self-port. At the edge of the river, a stray radio in a kiosk coughed once and twice, then surrendered a breath of music, 2 notes from a waltz that didn't remember its third. The kiosk owner looked up, crossed himself, and pretended to tidy cigarettes. Claire glanced at me. Think they'll let us go? They'll record us going. That's different. And Elsa? If she survives, it's because she learned to be a footnote on purpose. The kiosk radio crackled again. Not music this, a voice. Mine? Or the me that remembered better. Do not transmit, do not kill, revive. I turned the dial to static and left it there. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do to a message is refuse to carry it for someone else. We leave at dusk for Belgrade, for whatever they've been hiding under the word revise, I said, and felt the second heartbeat inside me nod, grim, conspiratorial, willing. Above the river, a single owl traced a careful circle and then folded itself into the sky as if to say, there are other birds. We were never your only watcher. We walked on, 2 witnesses rehearsing how to be human again long enough to argue with our own ghosts. Every map is a confession. It tells you what the cartographer feared to forget. The coordinates burned behind my eyes since Room 0. Beograd, Film Lab Cosmodge, Sub-Level 3. I didn't write them down. I didn't need to. When knowledge brands itself directly into your pulse, paper is redundant. Claire and I crossed the Balkan border under a sky that refused color. The truck that carried us was half engine, half prayer. On the road south, the ruins changed dialect, new alphabets painted on the bones of the old war. But the silence followed. Same taste, same hum beneath the engine, whispering that code we'd never escape. 3 short, 2 long. G1. The road to Kosmaj. The mountain rose like an old tooth, black against the gray morning. Locals called it the sleeping giant. No guards at the checkpoint, just a barrier of wood that had forgotten its purpose. We parked near an abandoned tram line where weeds had grown into rails like veins reclaiming iron. Still think it's a lab? Claire asked. Labs analyze. Archives rewrite. We hiked the rest on foot. Halfway up, the forest thinned to reveal a concrete dome. Crouched against the moss covered its face, but the door gleamed steel. New. Someone had been keeping it awake. I touched the... It hummed. The same pitch as the tower in... They moved the signal here. Claire's breath fogged the air. Then this is where it ends. Nothing ends, I said. It just changes editors. 2. The film lab inside. The air smelled of nitrate and ghost. Rows of film canisters stacked like bones. Reels half developed. Strips of negatives hanging from wires. Faces melting. Names dissolving mid-frame. In the center, a projector massive, humming even without power. Its light cone pointed toward a blank wall that rippled faintly, as if expecting to be remembered. Claire brushed her fingers along a reel labeled G's row. Same mark. Room 0's child, I said. I turned the crank on the projector. It resisted, then surrendered. The reels spun. Light burst across the room. For a moment there was only static snow. Then images began to form. Cities burning backward into rivers flowing uphill. Then faces. Ours. Claire gasped. That's us, Vienna. Look. The film was looping our lives. Prague, the monastery, the vault tower. Every step we'd taken, every word we'd burned. The machine hadn't been recording the past, it had been editing the present. Then new frames appeared, scenes we hadn't lived yet. A corridor, a white room. 2 figures walking apart. Stop it. I did, but the film kept running. You can't kill a signal, my voice said from the speaker, distorted. Older. You can only become its author. 3. The offer. The wall ahead of us flickered and deepened until it became a window. Elsa Kruger stood inside the projection, no longer flesh, but light, perfectly convinced its own reality. Welcome to the revision room. You found what all witnesses eventually find, the chance to edit. Edit what? I asked. Your own record, The archive of shadows feeds on contradiction. It survives when someone refuses the final draft. Claire lowered her gun slowly. And if we refuse this, then history writes you as ghosts and moves on. The projection brightened, the film reels around us, on the walls, scenes rewound, Weiss alive again, the church unbombed, the tower unbuilt. Elsa's face softened. Every version of the war exists here, Daniel. Every possible ending. Choose one to release. It will overwrite the world above. Claire looked at me. She's asking us to lie. She's asking us to curate. The choice. The machine opened like a flower of steel. Inside, 2 control levers glowed faint blue. One marked silence, the other signal. Claire stepped closer. If we pull silence, everything stops. No archives, no ghosts, no us. Signal? We continue. Forever. The hum in the floor deepened, impatient. She reached for silence. I caught her wrist. Claire, I said, the world needs a witness, even if it's flawed. She met my... And who witnesses the witness? I smiled faintly. Whoever's left after the credits. We pushed the levers together, halfway. Not silence, not signal. Something in between. The projector screamed. Light exploded. Film shredded into confetti of faces. The wall shook, the mountain groaned, and I felt the hum climb into my spine. Then, stillness.